Poštovani gledalci, dobar dan i dobrodošli u novu epizodu podcasta portala GERILA.info. Kad bi ovaj podcast bio kultna serija mučke, današnji podcast bi bio zapravo božićni specijal. Nakon gotovo 60 epizoda našeg podcasta imamo gosta s kojim ćemo razgovarati na engleskom jeziku. Moj današnji gost je ambasador OSCE-a u Bosni i Hercegovini, gospodin Rik Holcapl. Dobar dan, dobrodošli.
Hvala, thank you.
Prvo pitanje. Status stranca u Bosni i Hercegovini. U jednom entitetu stranac se doživljava negativno, u drugom vjerovatno pozitivno. Kako vi vidite status stranca danas u Bosni i Hercegovini?
When you're speaking of, you're saying that foreigners see one side negatively and the other side positively?
Yes.
I'm not sure I necessarily can accept the premise of the question in that regard. I think that as I've been talking with various partners, colleagues today in my meetings in Banja Luka, what I've been trying to stress very clearly is that certainly from the position of the OSCE mission and in my assessment, all of the international actors who remain involved in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the role that we see for ourselves here is to try and support the Dayton institutions. The Dayton institutions include Republika Srpska, they include the Federation, Brčko, cantons, municipalities, but also the state level institutions. And so it's not about trying to say one is good, one is bad. It is to say that all are necessary and all need to function properly. And the concerns that, at least from in my job that I have, are when I see behaviors or positions or attitudes that make it harder for any of those levels of government to function properly and to deliver for citizens. So if it's certain politicians saying, oh, state level institutions are useless, we don't need them, I will say, listen, I disagree. The state level institutions are are important. When I see people saying, well, Republika Srpska is not an appropriate framework for decisions, I'll say I disagree with that as well, and that Republika Srpska, as the federation, all three constituent peoples are elemental parts of the way that Bosnia and Herzegovina can function as a state. So I don't think that, and I'm quite confident that perspective is shared by the vast majority of all of my international colleagues in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well.
S obzirom da ste u Bosni i Hercegovinu došli, evo rećemo, prije možda pola godine, kako ste Bosnu i Hercegovinu očekivali, a kako ste zatekli?
Well, I just started in the job 6 months ago, as you say, but I've been involved in the region since 1992, having begun my career next door in Croatia in the 90s. My first visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina was actually in 1992, and so when I came, I hope I had a certain level of understanding about the challenges that Bosnia and Herzegovina faces. I think the strongest impression I have had is that those challenges remain in a way as big as ever, and more that while there is a sense that in the first 10, maybe 15 years after the conflict, some things were changing, institutions were becoming more effective and credible and functioning, and then, say, the last 15 years, there's been a sort of stagnation in a development, and I think that's part of what we're seeing in the political challenges, and even, as some like to call it, political crises that the country is going through, is that the institutions are not functioning the way that they should. They're not being able to take the kinds of decisions that are now in front of the country. And so, I think that's particularly evident when we look at some of the decisions that are necessary to move upon a European path for the country. And so it's not necessarily unexpected. I've been involved in following the politics and developments in the region for the last 3 decades. But it is certainly what I see as the fundamental challenge, both for my job, but even more importantly for political figures here in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Kada biste morali da napravite ključne razlike između Bosne i Hercegovine i Hrvatske u kojoj ste proveli više godina, koje bi to razlike bile?
I mean, I think, frankly, the biggest difference is that the government structures in Croatia are a lot simpler. It's easier to make decisions. The country's just not as complicated. I think even the legacies of the conflict and the way that it experienced and then survived and emerged from the conflict are very different, and that meant that there was a government, frankly, where it was easier to set out sort of what if the country wanted to move in a certain direction, here were the decisions it needed to take, and it was able to then take the decisions. Here in Bosnia, what we have is, I think we have some clarity about what the direction of travel should be, but it's so much harder to enable and support the governing institutions in being able to then take those decisions. To me, that's just a very fundamental difference that, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, when you need a decision taken, how many parties have to be involved, how many levels of government have to cooperate to get things done.
Jedna tema kada je u pitanju Hrvatska je pogotovo izazovna i značajna zadnjih mjeseci, pa možda čak i godina. Ona se prelama kroz lik i djelo pjevača Marka Perkovića Thompsona i pitanje revitalizacije ustaštva u Hrvatskoj. Thompson je nedavno održao koncerte u Bosni i Hercegovini. Kako gledate na taj problem? Da li je Hrvatska se dovoljno distancirala od ustaške ideologije?
Well, I mean, what I would say is that I'm here, I work in Bosnia and Herzegovina now, so I don't really, it's not my job to, and I don't necessarily follow that closely developments within Croatia. But what I would say is, and you've seen, and my mission has expressed concern about some of the symbolism and statements that were made and actions taken around the time of the Thompson concert of a few days ago, and a real concern that such rhetoric creates additional divisions within society. It is disrespectful to the victims of the crimes and the conflict in World War II, and so I think that's a serious concern about it. But I think within the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina is where it's appropriate for us to say that type of rhetoric, that type of symbology, certain flags, certain phrases, certain gestures being used are ones that really create difficulties here and need to be called out.
Da li su ovi prostori, uključujući i Bosnu i Hercegovini, zapravo taoci radikalnih, ne toliko ideologija, koliko narativa?
I'm not sure I would say that necessarily it's hostages, but I think that that stagnation that I was describing of, there was progress for a certain amount of times and the institutions were strengthening development, but then the stall in that development of institutions that can effectively function and deliver for citizens on the kinds of decisions that they're looking for, whether those are investment decisions, whether those are political decisions about institution building, about moving forward on the European path. I think all of those decisions are more challenging because there are political factors that may see their interests served better by advocating for just one narrower element of society's interests rather than the country's interests as a whole.
Razgovarali ste sa političkim liderima u Republici Srpskoj, sa predstavnicima civilnog sektora. Kakva su vaša iskustva tih razgovora? Šta su glavne poruke koje ste vi dobili i šta su glavne poruke koje ste prenijeli?
Let me start with the messages that I delivered were basically the same messages that I say in public engagements like this, which is we want to work with the Republika Srpska government and Republika Srpska institutions. We want to see them succeed, but we also need to see a more constructive attitude and success and an interest in having success at the state level as well, because there are certain decisions that can be taken only at that level, as opposed to just at the entity level. I think we have numerous examples of that. One of the most practical that I would cite, for example, that is, I think, probably of direct interest to many of your listeners, is the challenges of opening the new border crossing, where so much money has been invested and the border crossing is now ready, but the state institution, because of a lack of of constructive engagement at different levels. There are challenges to actually being able to figure out, okay, how do we now take the practical decisions that need to be taken to allow the border crossing to open? We have other examples. Look at the problem of air pollution. You have a World Bank program that has been waiting for, as I understand it, more than 2 years now, that would provide concessional lending to help address and replace some of the most polluting heating operations in Sarajevo and in some other locations around the country. But the various government, as I was saying before, these complicated government structures means that there are multiple approvals that need to be signed off on to verify the creditworthiness of the various organizations that would be involved in this World Bank financing program. And those institutions can't agree to just sign the paper saying, yes, this is a creditworthy project that is worthy of investment and the funding by the World Bank. And so for 2 years, there has been none of the financing from the World Bank that would help remove some of these most polluting chimneys that you see in Banja Luka, in Sarajevo, elsewhere, just spewing noxious gases into the atmosphere, literally killing people. The figures I've seen is something like 3,000 deaths a year attributable in Bosnia and Herzegovina to the quality of the lack of quality air and the excessive pollution. And yet, it's an institutional obstacle that has been created of people being unwilling to sit down and say, okay, this is a worthy goal, let's figure out how to take the decisions. People are more willing to say, like, no, it is easier for me to obstruct the decision than to approve the decision. And so things don't move forward. So this is the message that I keep driving home. In the Federation, in Republika Srpska, it's the same, is that there needs to be a greater attitude of actually trying to solve the problems that are there. In terms of the responses that I get, I think at one level, there is a serious lack of trust across all levels. I think there's a lack of trust on the part of officials within Republika Srpska towards partners elsewhere in the country, and vice versa, that make it harder. I mean, I understand some of those challenges, but in terms of justifications for the obstructionism or the failure to actually take these decisions, I really should leave it to them to try and explain their positions.
Da li mislite da je taj manjak povjerenja politički iskonstruisan?
There's certainly the possibility that it's politically useful for people to say that we can't work with others in the country. I'm less concerned with the motivations for it and more concerned with both the consequences of it and what might be the solutions to it. And so I think part of what because I make the same points about the need for a functioning RS in my meetings everywhere in the country, not just when I'm in Republika Srpska. And what I will say is that I do not meet objections to that. Most of the officials and parties in the Federation or officials in Sarajevo say, no, we understand the RS is a part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have to work with it, and we have to find ways to reach decisions and find compromises. That doesn't necessarily mean that the compromises are easy or obvious, but I think that there's the possibility to try and find those solutions. I think that whether they are politically constructed rationales, as you describe, I think also voters have a responsibility in this context as well. What types of politics are people voting for? Are they voting for a politics that tries to find solutions, or are they voting for a politics that tries to create obstacles?
Eto, kad ste već spomenuli izbore, da odmah uđemo u taj vorteks, u tu crnu rupu. Da li je zapravo izborni proces...
Don't call elections a black hole. So much of our work in the OSCE mission has
izbori u Bosni i Hercegovini.
Even though we've done a lot of work to try and make elections be more effectively administered, we still have a lot of work to do. I will accept that.
Da li su izbori u Bosni i Hercegovini zapravo najveća prepreka demokratije u Bosni i Hercegovini?
No, I mean, I don't think the elections are not an obstacle to democracy. Elections are a tool and in fact, an essential tool to be able to realize democracy. What that means is, and of course it matters how the elections are held and how credible the results are, which is what we continue to work on in the OSCE mission, which is one of the serious challenges still ahead. But it is really only through, not only through, but it is a fundamental and essential element of citizens being able to express to their political leaders what kinds of politics they support and what kinds of policies they are looking for, is at that choice at the elections, and then by also having effective means of citizen engagement in the actual policy discussions, the legislative process, et cetera. You know, the parliamentarians are open to inputs from their citizens and responsive to that. I think where we have the challenges is that then, so one, you need an electoral process where voters actually understand the choices in front of them. I think voters play a very important role in demanding that of their politicians as they campaign and saying, no, don't just use slogans, don't just use rhetoric, but tell us what are the policies that you are supporting and how is your position different from the other party that is looking for our vote. And then I think there is the need to make sure that the administration of elections accurately then reflects the choices that the voters make. And in that regard, we are deeply engaged as an OSCE mission with the Central Election Commission to try and procure new election technology that includes biometric identifiers so that linked to the actual quite impressive voter registries that Bosnia has already in election administration, that will ensure that everybody who comes to vote is a qualified voter, and that only qualified voters are being able to vote. And then together also with technology such as ballot scanners to ensure that then the votes that people cast are accurately counted for any election that happens. I think we are in a good position now. There's still a fair amount of work to do, but I'm cautiously optimistic that this election technology can be introduced in the October general elections that are coming up this year. And I think that will, and hopefully that will breed a positive reinforcing cycle where if voters have greater confidence that their votes actually are being accurately counted and only those who should be voting are voting, that there will also be more interest in voting because there will be greater credibility behind the results that come out.
Postoji li mogućnost da političke elite u Bosni i Hercegovini miniraju nove izborne, odnosno implementaciju novih izbornih tehnologija u oktobru ove godine?
What we're working on is to try and make sure that that's not the case, and that there is, in fact, the process is underway. As I say, I think the process, the timeframes are not super long, and so decisions need to be taken and they need to be implemented as efficiently and effectively as possible. We're working very closely with all the various elements of the government that need to do that, because it's not just the Central Election Commission that needs to do their job to be able to realize, to have a successful implementation of this. We have there are decisions even today that need to be taken, say, by the Ministry of Finance to release the funds for it. There is the process of procurement, and those who are involved in the procurement process need to do it. There are all of the officials at the local level who need to support the introduction of the technology. And of course, then there are the voters who need to educate themselves and understand how the process of voting will be a little different when they get to the polling station this time. And we will be doing from the OSCE missions part, we'll be doing public campaigns to try and help voters understand what is the difference, why are they, what it means when they're asked to provide a fingerprint to verify their identity, and how their ballot is marked and is counted, and what the benefits are in terms of election security and election integrity.
Vladajuća politika u Republici Srpskoj, vlast u Republici Srpskoj, jedno pitanje postavlja kao ključno pitanje za razvoj Bosne i Hercegovine, a to je kancelarija visokog predstavnika. Vlast u Republici Srpskoj insistira na tome da se ta kancelarija ugasi i da Bosna i Hercegovina više nema visokog predstavnika. Smatrate li da je došlo vrijeme za to ili Bosna i Hercegovina i dalje treba tu instituciju?
The message I have for anybody when they raise this question with me about why is there still any of these, why is there still an OSCE mission here? Why are there still foreign judges on the Constitutional Court? Why is there still an office of the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina? My response is, I understand why people would like to see, frankly, all of us finish our work and go home. And my response is, well, frankly, I think that's what all of us want as well, is to be able to successfully conclude our work. If that's what people in fact want, then what would help is more cooperation and a constructive approach to reaching the kinds of decisions that allow that. I mean, that's even true for the EU delegation in terms of they say, listen, what the process hopefully will be a faster and quicker process of EU accession. And once Bosnia-Herzegovina is a part of the EU delegation changes radically. There may still be a small, but all of these institutions, all of these individuals are here to try and deliver some specific results in terms of implementing decisions that have been taken even years before, or that should be taken. I don't think anybody. I was involved slightly in some related efforts back in the 90s when these institutions were set up. No one wanted or expected that 30 years later these institutions would still be here. The challenge is that the various decisions that have been sought to take to make it possible for us to say, okay, we have done as much as we can and our work is concluded. We haven't gotten as much of a cooperative approach in being able to achieve those. But we should, I don't, with the proper will to make the constitutional institutions that were agreed in the framework of the Dayton Agreement function properly, then there wouldn't be a need anymore for a high rep, for foreign judges on the Constitutional Court, for even an OSCE mission.
Nema nikakve sumnje da jedan dio političara u Republici Srpskoj će optužiti strance za podrivanje i Bosne i Hercegovine i dejtonskog mirovnog sporazuma. Smatrate li vi da su stranci u Bosni i Hercegovini napravili više štete ili više koristi?
I'm sorry, podrivanje, undermining. And the last part of your question again?
Da li su stranci u Bosni i Hercegovini napravili više štete ili koristi?
I look at, let me speak to what my mission, the OSCE mission specifically has achieved. And in terms of, we've made significant successes in terms of election administration, the establishment of a central, as you may recall, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was actually the OSCE mission that organized the elections. We've had significant successes in terms of helping to create a domestic institution that has actually quite competent and strong abilities in being able to deliver elections. I think that's demonstrated by their success in actually holding elections in not the easiest circumstances oftentimes. I think in terms of some of the human rights institutions, in terms of some of the institutions within the judiciary, there have been significant increases. I think in terms of investment, I think in terms of a lot of the money, you look at what the EU has provided in terms of assistance and investment within Bosnia and Herzegovina. I think that it has not been a question, the balance of benefit from international engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina is pretty clear. I think what there is there's a lot of frustration that, one, it hasn't gone faster, and two, that it's still necessary. And as I say, if people are frustrated that it's still necessary, to me, the solution is a greater attitude of constructive engagement and compromise to be able to take decisions that are sought. I mean, the EU, I think, has been very clear on many instances about what some of the expectations are specifically in terms of legislation, and yet still the legislation has not been adopted.
Međunarodne ustanove svih mogućih nivoa su u protekli 30 godine dale milijarde i milijarde dolara, evra, maraka, uložile su u Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Među njima vjerovatno i OSCE. Da li je moguće pratiti kako se svaka marka tog novca potrošila i da li se potrošila tamo gdje je bila namijenjena?
Let me just, as the head of the OSCE mission, let me just talk about the OSCE money, which is not billions and billions, but it has been millions and millions over the course of the 30 years. And yes, we know exactly where it was spent, and I think that I have no concern about whether that money has been diverted to illegal purposes or uses. I think there is, in some cases, not every dollar or euro that we have spent has had all of the impact in terms of promoting reform that we might have envisioned. But those are two different. I would distinguish between those categories of concern about has the money been embezzled or stolen, or has the money had as much an impact as it might have. I have less concern about the former, certainly at least with as regards OSCE money. But I think we always are looking to try and ensure that the programs that we're funding and the projects that we're supporting are actually having the kind of impact that we would like to see.
Otkako ste u Bosni i Hercegovini, da li je iko odbio da se sastane s vama?
I'm sorry?
Da li je iko odbio da se sastane s vama do sada, otkako ste u Bosni i Hercegovini?
No, some meetings took a little longer to arrange than others, but I've never had somebody say we won't meet with the OSCE ambassador.
Kako sa pozicije ambasadora OSCE-a gledate na medijske slobode u Bosni i Hercegovini, samim tim i u Republici Srpskoj?
With concern. It's a very difficult media environment in a number of ways. I think there are concerns about just the financial health and viability of a lot of the sector, both the independent media sector and the public broadcasting and public media sector. I'm sure you've been following the travails of BHRT and the challenges that are there, but not just in terms of the financial structure and resources that are available, but some also the environment where reporters face undue pressure and harassment and in even some cases threats for them for performing the valuable task of actually just trying to inform the public about events. I think there is a difficult situation. The OSCE, we spend a fair amount of time, and I have engaged on a number of occasions in dialogue or messaging to political leaders about what does it put at risk if harassment and threats are trying to chill the media's vital role in a democratic society of providing information to the public.
Hvala vam mnogo za ovaj razgovor.
Hvala vama.
Poštovani gledalci, u prethodnih skoro 60 epizoda vidjeli smo kako mi vidimo nas. Sada smo konačno vidjeli kako nas vidi i neko ko nije odavde. Hvala vam mnogo još jednom. Do sljedećeg gledanja, srdačan pozdrav.